Hey YouTube, Jake here. I apologize if you've been keeping up with my channel and all of a sudden all the videos stopped. This summer was crazy, but it has finally wound down, so I wanted to bring you another review. And this week I wanted to talk about the Fuji X-T20. So I have had this camera for about 2 months now. There it goes. About 2 months now, and I've gotten to use it for a lot of different events and a lot of traveling that I've done. So I put it through its paces, and I wanted to share some feedback on the Fuji X-T20. But before I do that, I want to let you know that the direction of this channel is going to be oriented toward, I guess you'd call it budget filmmaking. As I've said in past videos, I'm trying to learn videography myself. I come from a photography background, and most of this video stuff is new to me. But as I've learned, I've gotten really excited about gear and what can I buy that will make me better. And I know that that is not the direction that will actually produce good results. So I myself am sort of fighting that. I myself am trying to be more budget conscious, be more simplicity oriented, or have a simplicity mindset, and instead focus on telling a story or capturing an event or whatever. So if you are interested in that, if you're interested in doing things on a budget, keeping things simple, and also learning to tell a story, you're welcome to join me as I figure out what that means myself. But back to the Fuji X-T20. I bought this because it is a mirrorless camera. If you're not familiar with that, most SLRs like the 77D, the Canon I'm shooting on right now, have a mirror inside, and you sort of look through into the real world through that mirror. Everything you see is just light bouncing up through the viewfinder. With the mirrorless camera, however, there is no mirror. You can see the sensor directly, and that sensor actually picks up what's going on out there through the lens, and it basically projects it on either your rear screen or onto a tiny little screen inside the viewfinder. So it's called an electronic viewfinder. The reason that that's interesting is you get a lot more features in the viewfinder that you wouldn't get on a mirrored camera like what I'm shooting on now. And there's also some advantages for video and things like that. So I got this because, again, I haven't had a mirrorless camera before, and I wanted to try that out. And I also had heard great things about the Fuji for photography from an artistic perspective, or an enjoyment perspective. It's supposed to be a great photograph camera. And after my couple months using it here, I can wholeheartedly agree with that. It also makes a great video camera, but I want to share some good and some bad that I have learned along the way. So going over the physical body first, part of why people love this camera so much is, if it'll focus, you have these physical dials on top. So you've got your shutter speed, your shooting selection mode, your exposure compensation, shutter button, and then there's this auto switch here, which is very nice. That comes in handy anytime you're handing the camera off to somebody, or if you yourself are lost, just flip that switch and you're going to get a decent photo or a decent video. But I've been doing, for example, event photography, event videography, and had someone ask for me to be in a picture with them, or for me to throw them the camera so they can take a picture, and it's easy to just flip it, and they don't know any better, and now they're going to take something decent. So that said, great controls on top. Shutter speed dial it's very pleasant to use. If you can hear, very tactile. And then the exposure compensation dial being right at your thumb there is very nice when you're using any auto settings like auto ISO, aperture priority, whatever. On the front you have obviously your lens, and then down here I want to call attention, if you can see, this is your focus mode selection. So this little dial here actually controls either AFS, or single point autofocus, or a single autofocus, continuous autofocus, and then you can flip it to manual mode. And having that right there has been really convenient. Most lenses for other camera systems will have the manual and auto focus on the lens, but then you can't switch between AFC and AFS. So it's nice to have all that right there, and it is very pleasant to flip that switch and feel that click. Going to the back of the camera, you've got I think it's a 3.2 inch touchscreen, and I would describe it as entirely decent. It looks great. It's very great color, very bright, all those things. The touch aspect of it is alright. I found it to be a little bit unreliable at times, but I mainly use it just for selecting focus points, in which case it does the job just fine. You can either tap where you want to focus, or if your eye is up to the viewfinder, you can use your thumb in the top right of the screen to shift those focus points around. And you've got some controls for your menus. You have some focusing and exposure buttons up top. You've got a shutter, further shutter dial here, so this will do like fine adjustments to the shutter after it's been set with the top dial. And then you also have a dial, similar dial in the front that you adjust your aperture with. Batteries on the bottom. I want to call attention to the fact that this is your tripod mount. I'm sorry for all the focusing. This is your tripod mount, and this is your battery door. You may notice that if you have like an Arca mount, a square mount for your tripod, you cannot open the battery door. That is a poor design. It's also not centered under the lens, so if you're doing a panorama, you're actually not rotating in a linear way. It's actually rotating the camera at a weird angle. But more of the issue is that battery door. However, if you use something like a grip, which I have been, it bolts on to that tripod mount, and then you actually have access to the battery, and you can mount your tripod or mount it to your tripod as well. So on the other side, you've got an HDMI, a mini HDMI, a micro USB, and you'll notice that that headphone jack looks a little bit smaller, or that mic jack looks a little bit smaller. It is a 2.5 instead of a 3.5 millimeter jack, so you need an adapter to use any sort of shotgun mic or any sort of external mic to plug in there. Not really too complicated, but just something to keep in mind. On the other side, you've got a little bit of a thumb grip. This is nice to have. I've seen a couple people's that fell off, but just know that that's there. So physical stuff, I think that covers it. Moving to software, moving to the experience itself, I want to talk about photography and videography separately. So from a photography perspective, it is a great camera to use. It's very satisfying, it's very analog, it's very engaging to use. On something like my Canon here that I'm shooting on, everything is a plastic dial and everything sort of happens inside the camera in software, whereas if you're adjusting your shutter speed, you get the really nice dial on top. If you're adjusting the aperture, on the higher end Fuji lenses, such as this one here, this is the 18 to 55 millimeter f2.8 to f4, great lens. I'll talk about that in a second. But on a higher end lens like this, you actually have your aperture dial here, and it is also very clicky, very nice. And then your ISO is still built into one of the smaller dials there. But anyway, using the camera for photography, very satisfying. If you can hear this, the shutter is just a very pleasant shutter. Maybe that sounds pretentious or something, but using this is a very engaging, very pleasant thing. It has all these Fuji film simulations, and I'm sure you've seen something about that before, but if you go through, let me put this in a better spot here. If you go through those film simulations, you get a bunch of different color and black and white simulations that do look great, and then you can get shots just out of the camera that have that artistic quality without doing any post-processing. I personally shoot more just in RAW, and you can actually, like through something like Lightroom, you can actually apply those film presets later on too. So know that that's an option. Menus aren't great. They're not as bad as some. I know that everybody hates Sony menus. I would say this is easier to navigate than that. But compared to something like Canon, compared to the Nikon that I started on, these are still kind of confusing, and everything's kind of hidden. So trying to get into different photo and video settings can be frustrating. However, it's possible, and you learn pretty quickly. Like I said, I've only had it about 2 months, and I know where everything's at now. Other than that, for photography, it does a great job. I'll post some, I'll have some example shots throughout here. Fuji is known for their color quality, for the artistic quality of it, and they're also known for their lens quality. So while we were talking about photography, I will bring in the lens that I've been using, and that is the Fuji 18 to 55 millimeter f2.8 to f4, and it's one of the XF lenses. So the XC lenses are the introductory, the more basic, affordable, plasticky lenses, and then the XF lenses are more of the high-end, the fancier ones. So if the 18 to 55 sounds familiar to you, it's because that is the standard kit lens on any, on most APS-C cameras or crop sensor cameras like this. However, with it being an f2.8 to f4, you gain a significant amount of light. You also get a little bit more of that blurry background, the bokeh, and the image quality out of this lens is fantastic compared to something like the kit lens on a Canon or on a Fuji, or on a Nikon or something like that. You're going to get great images out of this, and I have used this almost exclusively as my go-to lens and have been really impressed with it. It's a great focal length. That's why it comes with every camera. And it being a lower aperture and being really nice glass performs very well. It does have image stabilization, and again, being one of the nicer lenses, it has the aperture ring here. So for example, if you wanted to go into aperture priority, let's see if I can get this in focus. I'm sorry. If you want to go into aperture priority, there's a little A switch here, and if you set that to automatic, then it's going to set the aperture for you, and the shutter will be your primary adjustment from there. So, photography, great camera, would highly recommend. Moving to videography, or video. Like I've said, this is a newer thing for me. It's something I'm learning. This Canon I'm shooting on was my first camera that had any sort of serious video capability. My Nikon before that was basically worthless for it. So, comparing this to my only other experience in the Canon, I've been really impressed. Something you'll probably see if you've done any research on this is that it shoots 4K, and that's really nice. It has really high quality files. Again, I'll post some little examples here. It does 4K 30 frames per second, not 60, which any camera at this price point, I don't think any of them offer that right now. But 4K 30 is great, and then 1080p up to 60 frames per second. I would say that I use 1080p a little bit more often just because the files are easier to manage, and a big factor, the biggest factor I'd say, is you do not get face detection in 4K. So for example, this video I'm shooting now, I could set my focus point right in the middle of the frame, but if I step out of the frame, it's going to focus on whatever's going on behind me, and I'll never know because, coming back to the physical design, this has a flip out screen that functions just in a vertical orientation. So you can set it straight up and down if you want to be able to see, shooting low. You can set it at a 45-degree angle up if I really want to, look up at the sky at it, but I cannot flip it around. So right now on my Canon, I'm seeing myself, I'm making sure I'm in frame, there's a white box around my face telling me you're in focus. So hopefully I'm in focus. However, with something like this, even at 18 millimeters, if I'm filming myself and holding it out like this, there's a good possibility that I'll either aim the wrong way or I'll kind of duck out of frame for a second and then it'll lose focus. And sometimes it'll take quite a bit to find, maybe only half of my face is in that focus point, and during that time it won't know what to do with itself. So 4K is great if you're behind the camera, or if you're seated and you can make sure I'm exactly framed and I'm not going to move. But 4K is not great for any sort of like vlogging or video like this where I've just set up and I'm going to take a quick shot at it and then head out. So 4K, great. 1080p, also great. Again, it does up to 60 frames per second, same as my Canon here, same as most anything at this price point. Something that, comparing these two, which I'm actually going to do a comparison video between the 77D and the X-T20, and I have to sell one of these, I can't hold on to both, so we're going to talk through my decision there. But something that has frustrated me with this, that the Canon does better, is when I switch into movie mode, which on this is going to be turning this top dial, the shooting mode, to movie or to video. When I do that, none of the shutter speed, none of the aperture, none of the ISO settings change. So for example, I was just shooting at 180, 1/180th of a second because it's really bright outside. But if I took a 30 frames per second video at 180th of a second, then I'm going to have choppy video. I'm not going to have that smooth quality I'm looking for. So I need to, every time I change between video and photo, I need to change my shutter speed, my aperture, my ISO, make sure those are adjusted for the new scene. Whereas the Canon, if I put it in photography, or if I'm shooting in the photography mode, have my shutter speed set at 1/4000th of a second, and I switch over to video, it's going to go right back to my last video setting, which is probably either a 50th or a 60th or whatever I'm shooting. So this does not separate the two modes well, in my opinion. Also, if you are trying to change between 4K 30, 4K 24, any of the 1080p settings, you have to go into the menu through the standard menu, kind of dive deep to change that. It takes probably 15 button clicks, versus on the Canon there's a quick menu setting. You push that button and within a few clicks you can dial down to whatever shutter speed you want, or excuse me, whatever frame rate you want. So again, for video, it has great quality, very, very nice 4K and 1080p files. I've been really impressed. But usability wise, making this object do what you want it to do, it takes a little bit more input, and there's times where I get frustrated because I just want to grab it and go. So it's not the worst, not the end of the world, but just something to be aware of. If you're going to be primarily shooting video, it will take a little bit to get it to do what you want, especially if you are going to be in front of the camera. Speaking to battery life, because this is a mirrorless camera, you can probably guess that it does not have as good a battery life as something like my 77D. This is rated for about 300 shots, something like that. 77D is rated for about 600 shots, so about double the shooting photography wise, and then I think you get about double the video, maybe a little bit less than that. I've shot about 30 minutes at 4K and 1080p mixed, and my battery's not looking great. So I usually carry 3 batteries here, whereas the 77D, I'd be more than comfortable going out with 2. And finally, I want to end on, we got a rainstorm coming in here at the park, but I want to end on an ergonomic note, and that is this camera. I will put a side-by-side picture with the 77D I'm shooting on right now, but this camera is very small. It's wonderful. You can keep it around your waist. I use a strap over one shoulder, kind of like a messenger bag, and walking around town, you know, exploring, at events, whatever. It's nice to have right at my waist there, pull it up, kind of forget it's there a lot of the time. However, if you are going to be holding this, you may notice that I'm kind of like claw handing this right now because there's basically no grip. The little bit of a bump here you have is helpful, but really not a solution. And like I said, you can attach a grip to the bottom, but it still is not deep enough for someone with, I'm 6'1" and have pretty large hands, so I end up kind of clamping down on this, and after I've been holding it for a while, if I've been running around, if I'm worn out, that sort of thing, maybe this sounds lazy, but I get tired of holding this. It's very boxy, it's very, because it's a metal body, which is great, it's very non-ergonomic in a lot of ways. It has that vintage feel, it has that sort of fun aesthetic, but it also can be frustrating to use, or to hold on to, I guess. So I think I covered just about everything I wanted to talk about. If you have more questions, feel free to comment down below and I'll share some more of my experience with it. I'm going to add something. This is going to be just kind of clipped onto the end here. It's a great thing that I have loved about shooting with a mirrorless camera, this one specifically, is when you go into manual focus, when you adjust that little knob there and you go into manual focus, oh, there it goes, you get focus peaking. In other words, if if my face is in focus right now, there'd be, in my case, I set it to these bright red lines that go around it. Set it to blue, white, red, whatever. The reason that I've loved that so much is you can shoot with vintage lenses on a mirrorless camera, and they make these simple little adapters. So I've been shooting with a Canon 50mm f1.8 lens from the 80s and popped it right on there, and I've gotten some wonderful portraits. I'll share those here. And you can use vintage lenses on a mirrored camera like the 77D, but without focus peaking, you're really just hunting and guessing. Even though old film cameras had some sort of focus aid built into them, but with something like this, you're just guessing. So that's another advantage to the mirrorless camera. Another reason that these are very nice. But I'm gonna close there. Rain is starting to fall, and I need to get my camera put away. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have tips on shooting or speaking, or if you have any questions about this or the 77D. I hope to have another video out with the comparison in about a week or so, and I'll try to be more faithful to posting and sharing and things like that. Thanks, bye. Okay, so I wanted to add one quick thing. I did make it back to the car, but I did get caught in the storm as well. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that I got this off eBay for $430 for the body and $310 for the lens, so about $750-ish for the whole kit that I've been using, and I figured that was significant to whether or not you could afford this, whether or not it was in your price range. That's still a lot cheaper than $12.99 if you got the X-T20 kit new with the same lens. And there's some stuff missing, but you're getting a lot in this Fuji X-T20 package. And here's a 4K sample for you. Hopefully my face is in focus. Here's another monkey. I'm gonna go get dried.